Great. Welcome to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today on the line, all the way from New York, I have Melissa Romo. And Melissa, you are the VP of Global Customer Marketing for a multinational company and the author of a brand new book released in April 2023 called Your Resource is Human. I'm super excited to talk with you about this book. And we'll start with the first question, which always is, what does your virtual office look like? And what do you need to get your work done?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having me here. I'm so excited to speak with you. And I first have to thank you for the beautiful foreword that you wrote for Your Resource is Human. You have a deep experience with remote work and being collaborating from anywhere. And I was just so happy to have your voice at the front of the book. So thank you so much for that. What does my space look like? So I have a mirror so I can take a quick look at myself. It's right behind my desk, so I can take a quick look at myself before I get onto a call. I usually always use video, and that's more to a little bit to combat loneliness. I just like looking at other people, and I like other people being able to look at me. And so I'll use the video. So I'll take a quick look at myself, and I have a happy light, which is a like a UV light that I use a lot in the winter time because I'm a sun seeker. So winter is kind of a bummer for me. So I have a happy light that sits on my desk. And then on the other side of my desk, I have a little thought of the day calendar, that stands on my desk. And I find that I'm one of these people who I think lots of us have this problem of negative self-talk and psyching ourselves out with some just bad narratives that we let loose in our brains. And so I like these little thoughts of the day diaries because I'll look at it, it sits and it looks at me off to the right of my computer screen. And it just reminds me, you know, how to think and how to think more positively. Like today says, you can't change what's going on around you until you start changing what's going on within you. So good reminders. So I like to fill my
Ooh,
space with good brain reminders. And then I have little cubbies where I have like lipstick and I have a fidget spinner that I'll spin if I'm in a meeting and I'm starting to get really antsy because it's going on too long. I'll just grab my fidget spinner and it looks like this and just spin it around in my fingers. I don't know if you have these in Europe. They're really popular here, but you just spin them
yeah.
around. I mean, I just
My
put myself
nephews and nieces love them. Yeah.
Yeah, I just put myself on mute and I just go and go and go with the spinner. So I have that and like tons and tons of little mini notebooks because I love any paper good at all, at any, and I just have them all stacked up neatly and I just like how they look. So
I have the same. I have all kinds of notebooks that I've kept for years because I'm really a tactile person. I like to, as much as I love the virtual world, there's some things that remain tactile. And I think it's good to have a
yeah,
mix of both.
it
I'm
is. And
really
isn't
curious. Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
I was just going to say, isn't it interesting that what I described, like looking at the notebooks and feeling the notebooks and then having the fidget spinner, like these are tactile tools that are really important to me. And I think probably more important because I work virtually, right? So everything's in a computer screen. So then I need things around me that I can touch and that I like to touch and look at.
That is a really good point, actually, given that everything's in the screen. Like, how can we, like, our environments are a lot less tactile than they used to be in general. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a very interesting one. One other thing that came up is your UV light. Is it actually called a happy light, or is that what you call it?
It is called a happy light. There it is.
Ah,
And it's sold by a company called Verilux, and it's on Amazon. And has a little button at the top, and then this sunlight comes out, and you can change the settings, and you change the color, the warmth, and the coolness of it. And yeah, it's great. It just sits on my desk. I pop it on. I actually look better in video with the with the light on.
that's a good
So
point.
yeah.
That's a good point. Well, I asked because when I lived in Los Angeles, I thought, oh, I'm not really light sensitive. I'm not sensitive to light. And then when I moved to Europe and the Netherlands and started experiencing the dark winters, I realized, like, oh, I was just living in Los Angeles in a sun heaven.
That's right.
I
Everybody
didn't
has some.
realize.
I lived
Exactly.
in Warsaw, Poland for a few years when I was in my 20s, and I remember being in meetings that would end at like 3 p.m., 2:30, 3 p.m., and the sun was pretty much down by then in the winter. And I really struggled because I've never been officially diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder, but I probably have it or am borderline. So
But you do bring up a point in a couple of ways. One is you like to turn video on because it minimizes the loneliness. But also, when I think back of in the old days when we worked in the office, they're not that long ago, but in the old days when we worked in the office, we would get outside. So even when it was dark, you were going outside to get to the office. You had some sort of a commute to bring you outside, which would help and also helps with the loneliness. These things like the happy lights, these are sort of these unexpected things that happen when you go remote because something else gets taken away. So instead of the commute and getting outside, we've got instead a happy light because we don't have that commute. In any case, so just interesting to note how things change when we go from the physical sort of to the more virtual world, or when we set up our own work environments. I want to dive into your book, Your Resource is Human. And indeed, I wrote the foreword. I was so honored to write the foreword for this book because this book came to me at a very very fortuitous time in that I was starting to create a leadership workshop, and I had already created I was creating a leadership workshop, I should say. And I was evaluating my own leadership skills in leading a team. And both this book and the workshop really caused a lot of reflection. And I realized, I thought of myself as a good leader, but I realized that there were some really key components to leadership that I was really missing. And so I loved your book. I love how you brought it out. And I want to just ask you first, before we dive into the subjects, is why did you write this? What inspired you to write
well,
this?
I was leading a team of about 50 people for the company I work for now that are all over the world. And they are one of the well, not one of, they are the most tight-knit team I have ever been a part of. They are the absolute most tight-knit team. They're in 10 different cities all over the world. They speak different languages. They work different time zones, from Germany over to Los Angeles, we're really spread out. But they're super tight knit. They really get on so well. They're supportive of each other. They enjoy working together. There's a great team vibe. And I asked myself, how is that possible when half of them have never met each other, right? Half of them, by the time I started writing my book at the beginning of 2022, half of them had never met each other. They came in the pandemic. They'd never met one person in the team, right? They're working by themselves somewhere and never met one person in the team, but nevertheless, they were really, really tight knit. So part of the reason I wanted to write the book was I wanted to explore how that was possible. How is it possible that a team that spread out could be that tight knit? Because it was really something magical, and it was really an exercise. This book was an exercise of me trying to bottle that magic. Is how do they do it? So a lot of what I write about was observational. So I write about what I've seen my team do with each other, and I've seen the habits and practices that they've implemented. And that's part of what's in the solution section of my book in the second part. But I also looked at what I hope I did to facilitate that type of environment, right? Of creating this sort of psychological safety and this desire to be authentic and being authentic myself, and seeking open communication and really kind of driving that staying in touch with people. I mean, it sounds sort of so silly to say that one-on-one meetings are really, really critical in a virtual remote setting. And they're one of the most critical success factors of having a successful remote team, but they really are. And what was really interesting to me in the pandemic is many leaders stopped having them, right? I would talk to friends in New York who are working in other multinational companies, and I'd say, well, when did you last talk to your leader? And they said, oh, like 3 months ago. And I'm thinking to myself, why are you not talking to your leader? Why is your leader not talking to you? So the only explanation I could come up with was that, the old management by walking around was what we were all taught in business school. I went to business school 20 years ago. I actually just came back from my 20th reunion, and I feel like old as Methuselah now. Um, But I went to business school and they taught us this thing called management by walking around, MBWA. It's like an official management methodology. And what you are supposed to do is walk the floor, right? You walk the floor, you meet your people, you talk to people on the front line, you get to know people, you're visible. And so we were all taught that. And, that works when we're all in the same building, right? But increasingly, and whether it's remote work or hybrid work or global operating models, there's many different reasons that people now work separated from each other. It's not just remote work. It's also the global operating model. Now that is so much more the norm, we can't lean on management by walking around. We have to take management by walking around, and we have to put it through a filter, translate it to the virtual environment, and ask ourselves, what do I need to do as a manager now to replicate that visibility, right? How do I be visible to people when I'm not going to pass them on the floor anymore, right? And so it all comes back to those one-on-one conversations. People don't talk in group meetings, right? So if you're a leader and you're having an all hands and you're patting yourself on the back because you have these frequent all hands, people are multitasking. They're not paying attention. There's all kinds of stuff online now about the ineffectiveness of all hands meetings. If you ask a question, people will be really quiet. No one wants to speak in a big group setting, especially the junior people, right? So large meetings are the exact opposite of what you should be spending your time doing. You need to be having one-on-ones or two-on-ones. I like to have, when I'm talking to stakeholders, I like to have cluster meetings. I don't want to have a big, 50-person meeting where I'm presenting at 50 people. I want to have a cluster meeting with 3 or 4 people. And those 3 or 4 people all work in the same functional area and they all care about the same thing. It does mean I have more meetings because I'm clustering my conversations, but the conversations are so much better and they're so much more intentional about connecting and building trust and psychological safety. So, we have to be visible. We have to build trust. We have to build psychological safety, but the way we used to do it is not the way we have to do it now.
Indeed, I love that. And I can imagine people not wanting to speak out because even myself, I am an extrovert in meetings in sort of general. And even I am super shy speaking out. I remember I was part of this big panel and it was all these important people from all over the world. I was totally intimidated and there was no way that I was going to ask a question unless I knew that it was a good question. Right. But yeah, so I can imagine. So indeed, we have to be visible in different ways. Now, I want to just my initial question is, well, how do we do that? But I know that that's a big question and it has a very nuanced answer. But yet I'm going to pose it to you anyway. We can take it in any direction you want. How can we be more visible? What are some of the practices that you've seen that replace walking the floor?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I talk about 5 leadership blueprints. So leadership behavior blueprints in my book, and they're the 5 leadership behaviors that are most critical to running a good, healthy, tight-knit virtual team. And this is based on my personal experience, but it's also based on interviews I did with experts for the book. And it's based on research I did about organizational behavior, leadership norms, workplace psychology. So I did lots of research in these different adjacent areas. And so that's where these leadership blueprints come from. And the five leadership behaviors are checking in, which I just talked about, all right, checking in one-on-one, communicating with optimism. The third one is building trust. The fourth one is setting boundaries. And the fifth one is managing performance. And so if you are looking at checking in, communicating with optimism, building trust, setting boundaries, and managing performance, if that's your focus and you just continually focus in those 5 areas, you're going to be able to create a much healthier work experience for the people working for you, both in terms of performance and in terms of their engagement and how they feel. Both things are going to be helped. One of my favorites to talk about is managing performance because leaders are so nervous about this, right? If I've got somebody working for me at their kitchen table, how do I know they're not watching Netflix all day, right? I mean, this is what leaders from the traditional work model, this is what they worry about. Now, those of us who have worked remotely for a long time know that at the beginning, sure, it's really tempting to watch Netflix, all day, or it's really tempting to go shopping or whatever, or have like a 3-hour coffee with a friend, of course. But what you learn very quickly is your career will be over if that's how you spend your time, right? You're not going to produce anything. You're not going to produce anything.
Yeah.
You're not going to progress in your career. Some people don't care, right? And so, and it becomes really obvious really quickly, the people who are having the 3-hour coffees, right? So it's not hard to spot. So what I would tell leaders is about managing performance is don't worry that people are goofing off. It's not hard to spot. And once somebody gets past that honeymoon period of remote work, they realize, oh, okay, I've got to produce if I'm going to keep my career going as a remote worker. And so people quickly figure that out. And then what a leader has to do is manage performance in terms of just documenting what's required, document OKRs. What are the OKRs the objectives and key results that this person has to deliver for you? Document those. We do this in my company. And many companies do this, but this is so important with remote teams. Document what the results have to be. And then don't only document and then look at them at the end of the fiscal year. Look at them every single check-in conversation. How are you doing with your OKRs? How are you progressing on these key results? Where are you blocked? Where can I help? I mean, they have to be living, breathing barometers of how well a person is doing at delivering their work, right? They're so important. And if you're doing that, so not only I think you take away the leader's anxiety in terms of the person being productive, but you also, what I think is really magical about managing performance in a virtual setting, and this is how I write about it, is it creates a sense of belonging, right? If I'm delivering, if I'm a remote worker and I'm delivering and I'm putting scores on the doors, right? And I'm delivering, well, I feel like I'm part of the team, right? I feel like I'm part of the team. Then my leader and other leaders and other peers can recognize what I'm doing and, say, hey, that's amazing what you just did, or, I can't wait to see what's going to happen with that or whatever. You feel like you're part of a team. So managing performance is a huge, huge piece of making people feel like they belong, even when they're remote. So I really am fascinated by that chapter. I was fascinated by the research I did and how important belonging and performance, what the relationship is between the two of them, because I think it also helps leaders who are nervous about remote work if they spend time on that. And then, the other one I do write a lot about is setting boundaries, because again, we don't really have to worry so much about remote people being offline too much. What we really have to worry about is them being online too much, right? And I've
Right.
talked to person after person who gets burnt out because they're trying to show up everywhere all the time for their leaders and for their teams. And it's really difficult for people who work in a different time zone to their leader or to the rest of their teams, because there'll be people online and you're not online, and it's always on your mind, right? It's this low level kind of
Yeah.
nervousness, like someone's going to be looking for me and I'm not online. And I call it the tyranny of being online. This really weighs on people who work remotely. It's always in the background, right? Like people are gonna be looking for me and I'm not there. So it could be you announce your working hours, like my working hours are, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. or this time zone, these are my working hours. And so people know when they try to message you in Teams or whatever, they'll see your working hours and they'll know, okay, I'm not going to hear back from this person until they have their working hours. Publish that in Teams. Like I said, these are my working hours. Agree that with your leader. Lots of us who work in global jobs have really untraditional hours, right? Like sometimes I'll be busy until 7 or 8 o'clock at night if I have to talk to people in California, or I'll be online at 6 a.m. if I have to have a meeting with someone in Germany, right? Like I'll be all over the place, but if I'm online at 6 a.m., by 2 or 3 o'clock, I'm going to be offline. I have to be offline because that's the healthy thing for me as a person. And so, and I shouldn't have to worry that people will be looking for me, right? So, I think leaders setting boundaries is also about recognizing the global scope of someone's job and recognizing
Mhm.
that people's hours will have to shift, and they will need, 7 or 8 hours nonstop at a computer is more than enough, right? And people need to be able to step away and not be nervous about it. So that leadership behavior, setting boundaries, it's all about understanding those nuances and supporting a person so they don't worry, right?
Right, because there's a part of trust is certainty. So if you
Yeah.
feel uncertain about how people feel about you and your job, then you really, there's a sort of a lack of trust that's happening there. I can imagine. Oh, I love these. So we've got a lot about setting boundaries, and I really like the tie between belonging and managing performance. Because that is indeed one of the changes that we make, right? We go from being time oriented to being results oriented, which means we have to be really clear about what the results look like. And we need to check in on that a little bit more. But what I didn't really put together was how much it matters to the belonging of the team that everybody understands how they're contributing to the bigger picture. That is group cohesion.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the story I tell in the book is, remember a time when you were in grade school and maybe you were in the US, we have these field days in May and June. Like we get all the kids get out in this, in the schoolyard. They have these spoon egg races and all these relay races and stuff like that. And remember how it felt to be on a relay race with a couple of other students, and you run the track and you pass the baton and then you win, and how great that feels, like all four of you having won together. Like that's how good it feels when you accomplish something as part of a team. And so that focus on accomplishments and performance ladders straight back to belonging. And we as leaders, we just need to be just going through that motion continuously. What are you accomplishing? Let's celebrate it. What are you accomplishing next? Let's tell everybody what you're trying to do so they can help you. So that it's so key. And I also love the fact that I believe it will help leaders feel more comfortable with virtual teams, right? If there's more of a natural focus on outcomes.
Right. It's how we visualize how we're going to work together and what we're going to accomplish together. Indeed. And in the office, we could do it physically. Remote, we have to do it in a new and different way.
Yeah.
So we're coming to the end of our interview, which is crazy. I've taken copious notes. I could ask a million more questions, but I want to end with just one question, which is if you are giving advice to leaders who are really, I wouldn't say just starting out, but really starting to recognize that they need to do something different, where should they start? What's like the first tangible step a leader can take?
Well,
Besides reading your book, of course. Excuse me for
reading my book.
interrupting.
I was just going to say, honestly, like where I would send a person, whether it was my book or not. I have a diagnostics section in my book. It's 15 questions, and it's called the Remote Ready Rating in the book, and it asks you 15 questions, and the 15 questions help you understand how remote ready are you as a leader? Like how comfortable are you with remote, and how comfortable are you leading people who are remote? And so once you take that diagnostic, it hones in on those 5 leadership behaviors, and you'll see right away where you have issues. Like maybe you don't ever have one-on-one meetings with your team, and it never occurs to you, and you take this diagnostic and it sticks out, and you're like, oh, okay, this is missing in my leadership practices. So this remote ready rating will help you kind of pinpoint the things that you're doing well and the things that are completely missing from your tool set. And then the other thing the first thing I do is self-reflection. How am I at being a remote leader? And that diagnostic will help. And then the second thing is reflection with other people you work with and other people who work for you. And again, having either cluster meetings or with a small group or one-on-one conversations, and just say, I want to be better at this. I'm wondering how you feel, right? I'm wondering what you need. And there is, at the front of my book, there is a different diagnostic, which is called the Emotions and Mindset Questionnaire. And I've created 2 versions of it. One version that an individual contributor can answer, and then a different version asking the questions in a slightly different way that the leader can take. And then you can compare your scores, and the leader might think something is going great. They might think boundaries is in a really good place, tick that box. And then, but you have your employee take that, who reports to you, and it's off the charts bad, right? And that's a really interesting piece of data to have together and talk about it. So
Yeah.
The book was really designed to help leaders explore, to reflect on their own needs as leaders, but also to use in partnership with the people working for them to understand what their people need too.
Brilliant. So that we have the same vision of reality together. That's really the important part of working remotely, is that we all, like what we've been talking about over the last 20 minutes, that we all have the same vision of reality together. I love this. I love this. So for those of you watching, I'm holding up the book now. And of course, I will have all of these links in the show notes. Melissa, thank you so much for spending your time with me today. As the very last question I want to ask, where can people find you online?
So the best thing to do is follow me on LinkedIn. So anything I have to say related to the book, I also will comment on headlines that are coming out, all over the world about remote work and leading remote teams. So it's Melissa T. Romo in LinkedIn. Anyone who wants to follow me can follow me. So feel free to do that there. I'm also on Instagram as @RomoWriter. And I do occasionally have little book contests and special things for people following me there. So Instagram or LinkedIn are great places.
Love it. Thank you so much. And I'll add those to the show notes for easy reference for people. Thank you again for being here today. I took copious notes and I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with this audience.
Thank you so much for the invite, Lisa. I appreciate it.
And until next time, everybody, be powerful.